Well, I know you're going to enjoy this great conversation with Hardy Smith, who is a fantastic consultant, speaker, and author in the nonprofit space, but he's especially interested in the area of board leadership. And I know this is a topic on your mind as a nonprofit leader. In fact, you're going to love the title of Hardy's book because it really says it all. Stop the Nonprofit Board Blame Game. Now, that's the title of his book, but the title of this episode is probably a question that has been on your mind and one that Hardy and I are going to discuss. And that question is this: why don't my board members do what they're supposed to do? Well, Hardy is going to unpack and answer that exact question. And it might surprise you because I think there's obviously two sides to every story. But Hardy's going to break down these three kind of key elements or questions. Number one, what are these problems that many nonprofit organizations are facing as it relates to their board? Secondly, why are these problems occurring in the first place? And most importantly, number three, what can we do about it? Well, answers to these questions, as well as many more resources, are a good reason to check out the show notes. Again, go to our podcast page at pattonmcdowell.com. This is episode number 186, and you can find out more about Hardy, his great book, again titled Stop the Nonprofit Board Blame Game, and other resources that he has at his website, and other things that will help you as a nonprofit leader. Without further ado, please enjoy my conversation with Hardy Smith. Hardy, thank you for joining me on the path.
Thank you so very much for this opportunity. I'm looking forward to visiting with you and your listeners on the Your Path to Nonprofit Leadership podcast. We'll have some fun here.
I'm grateful for that, and fun indeed. Although some of our nonprofit friends, Hardy, are not having fun on one particular topic that you know more than anything about, which is how to interact with their boards. And you and I, in preliminary conversation, of course, talked about the extremes, right? They're either disengaged or they're micromanaging, and we're seeming to struggle in our sector with that board dynamic. In fact, we've titled this episode, why don't our board members do what they're supposed to do? But why do you think? Is there a headline, Hardy, as you've explored this topic, as to why many nonprofit leaders are struggling with their board?
Well, that's a great question, and in my work with nonprofits across the country, and you've probably seen this yourself, it is not a question that's limited to any one nonprofit organization or one part of the country. It's nationwide, and it's been around for a long, long time. It's the number one question that I get asked over and over and over again. And you see that the frustration around board engagement is certainly real. The angst is real. There's a whole lot of that standard question about, well, what causes you to keep you awake at night? Well, this is one for the nonprofit professionals. So hopefully we're going to share some answers today that'll cause an awareness and help lead to maybe a few more better sleep at night for some folks.
Well, on behalf of everyone that needs better rest, I'm delighted you're going to help us with that, because you're right. It's such a critical element of nonprofit leadership, that dynamic between the senior staff and the board in particular. And so I'm grateful that you've studied this, but you've got ideas and suggestions that are going to help us. Before we unpack that topic, Hardy, though, talk about your journey. You've had a varied and impressive leadership journey, but what brought you to the work you're doing now?
Well, that's a great question. It's always fun because from NASCAR to nonprofits, people are always interested in exactly how the heck did that happen. I come from a community, a family that totally believes in community involvement, community participation. So literally from very young age, I was involved with volunteering and community organizations, and that personal involvement has carried through to this day. And then from a professional career standpoint, I worked 30 years in the high performance world of NASCAR racing. And part of well, a lot of that experience was involved with associations, community organizations, nonprofits all across the country as I represented NASCAR. So it was and I did a whole lot of speaking for NASCAR, and then through my other personal involvement with different organizations. So it really kind of led up to where I am today. My involvement with other organizations was in training and problem solving. That problem solving was my job description for NASCAR.
Right.
My job description was Hardy, anticipate, see problems before that might affect us, and make sure that you don't let those problems happen. And then, so, okay, well, if a problem or situation did kind of slip through the cracks, I was supposed to darn well find a solution and fix it in a hurry. So I always knew that I had these fantastic life experiences that very few people ever have, and that at someday I would be able to kind of put all that together for a platform where I was really working for myself to help others instead of working for someone else. And so that led me to where I am today as a consultant and speaker, and I enjoy it very much.
Was the concept of nonprofit board, was that something you ran into a lot, I'm guessing, Hardy, or is it a gradual kind of realization that, wow, I'm seeing some of the same issues or different issues, but all contributing to challenges, particularly because you've always been very community minded in all the roles you've had. But I'm wondering, was there a certain kind of key moment when you're like, hey, I need to really bring this together because I think I can help?
Yes, there was, and it was, quite often there are those things that, situations we see in an everyday life that, and I think we all do, that you see it every single day, and you're not really seeing that it might be something that needs to be addressed, or should be a priority for getting fixed, or see it as being bigger than just you, right?
Yeah. Forest through the trees, right? Sometimes, Hardy, you can't see the forest through the trees.
So like anyone who's been involved with any level of nonprofits, whether volunteer groups, whether it's from a local, state, regional, or national levels, you're going to see this. And you've probably been on boards. Everyone's been on boards themselves. And you see this, but maybe not realizing how significant or the consequences really are. So I was doing a training session, and I outlined this in my book, but I was doing a training session and asked a group of about 100 nonprofit leaders, what's your biggest problem? And they just kind of blurted out, it's the board members. Why don't board members do what they're supposed to do?
Right.
And there was that response was came back to me from the audience with such a force. I took a step back.
Right.
And then there was this hush, and the people in the audience, these nonprofit CEOs, were all looking at each other, and they were saying, oh gosh, so there was a realization that they were all having a top problem. Well, number one, I saw the initial answer is, whoa, there's something there I hadn't really fully grasped, right?
You were on to something.
And then when the second response of them realizing that this was a universal issue, that was like point number two of, wow, I have got to get into this. Now, interestingly enough, there is no shortage of expressions of frustration, if you will, in the chat rooms and different group conversations around frustration with nonprofit boards and what do we do and why is this and why does that happen? No shortage of training, no shortage of books, no shortage of speakers about this very topic. But it maybe it's that NASCAR background. You win the race and you have to tear down your car because you want to find out, well, why did we win? What happened? So you can replicate it the next week. And then, of course, if you finish second through 40th or so, you want to find out why you didn't win. Exactly. And make sure that doesn't happen again. So maybe exactly. It's that NASCAR approach to kind of problem solving is, hey, I got to figure this thing out. So that led me, the journey to figuring that out is what ultimately produced the book, Stop the Nonprofit Board Blame Game.
Well, and you've written a fantastic book, and I'm delighted to lift it up to our listeners, because you have, in fact, taken apart the vehicle using the NASCAR analogy of what these issues are. And I think there's some surprising things you found, because as the title implies, of course, there's the perspective from the nonprofit leader. Well, it's the board member's fault. but maybe, Hardy, as you taught me, it's not always the board member's fault, and so that's something you're gonna get into. But we'll talk about the book. So as you realized in that, what you described almost like a focus group, every executive director in the room said, "Hey, Hardy, this is keeping us up at night." So you kept hearing that. Tell me about the origins of the book. Was that then the first step to, all right, I need to write all this stuff down?
Well, the first thing I did was to, in a very crude manner, and I'm upfront in the book, I am not a researcher. I am not an analytical specialist. I'm not a data guy, although I like all of that stuff. This book might not hold up to, I don't pretend to be an academic and hold this book up for academic scrutiny. I am not one of those people. But I had to find an answer, and I didn't have a preconceived answer. So what I did was I said, okay, I want to take a different approach. I want to ask board members, hey, this is what your nonprofit professionals are saying about you. Why are they saying that? Why don't you do what you're supposed to do? You as a collective.
Right.
I reached out to board members across the country, that individuals that I knew from different associations and different activities and relationships that I had. So not the professionals, the board members. And I asked them that key question: why don't board members do what they're supposed to do? Had a few other questions in there also. And it was a very crude email survey, and I'll be honest about that.
Sure.
And had open-ended questions. And then it seems like there are these multiple epiphanies that just keep happening. And the answers I got back, while of course the words were different, there was definitely a passion and I guess the meanings and the feelings were so strong. And it was like, whoo, a chance. Finally, somebody's asked me, and I'm going to tell them, here's why I don't do what I'm supposed to do.
Yes. There's another side to the story, right, Hardy? There's another side to this story.
Oh, my goodness gracious. So when I started out just kind of creating a metrics, I'm spreading all these surveys out all across the room. And of course, they're saying their writing is different words, of course, but the meaning was 100% universal. Everybody was in lockstep.
Wow.
So what I found was, holy smokes, there is definitely another side to this story. And
right.
So they shared with me. And then I started, okay, well, how many say communication? How many say the wrong people on the board? And it's all of a sudden, they're all saying the same thing. So for me, that was enough to validate that, wow, there is something here that needs to be addressed. So number one, what that does is it told me very quickly that there are a whole lot of board members, for all the reasons that the book outlines, that are not happy with their board service experience. So, and they point the finger, and this is where the blame game comes in.
Yeah.
They point the finger to the nonprofit staff that they've signed up to serve. And so you've got the nonprofit professionals pointing a finger at board members. You've got board members pointing a finger at nonprofit professionals. And that's why you've got the two fingers of blame on the cover of the book, and creates the blame game. And it goes from there.
Such a good illustration. And you're right. And I think you and I, just as our listeners are probably anticipating, that there are indeed two sides to this story. And it's so good that you're helping us unpack it. Because I think if our listeners are primarily nonprofit staff, yes, we want to acknowledge, and you have acknowledged in the book, their perspective, but we also need to put ourselves in the shoes of our board members, right, who are having a different perspective. And I guess, Hardy, before we unpack it even further, not only have you written this great book about this issue, but you're also writing, of course, for BoardSource. So talk about that. Is that another way you've been able to bring these messages to life?
Yes, I've have been an off and on blogger for BoardSource for several years, and it's an opportunity to kind of long-term blog post, I guess, a long form blog post.
Right.
And so I really enjoy that, the opportunity to go deep into particular subjects. All of my subjects that I write about are around board performance. And they're all, and you can, well, they're all listed on all of my blogs for BoardSource are on my website. You can also Google Hardy Smith blog is on BoardSource, or Hardy Smith articles on the BoardSource blog, and you can get the whole list there.
Fantastic.
So I really enjoyed those, and have been very fortunate with engagement, and some of my articles that have wound up producing some of the, maybe it's my contrarian approach, and kind of poke things a little bit, but have wound up being very popular for BoardSource. So I'm pleased with that.
Another link that we need to put in the show notes, and more reason for our listeners to check it out, Hardy, because you do have a lot of good things to say about this. Even if people don't always agree, you're getting them to think about it, right? And that is indeed a skill you bring, even if it's contrarian. But all right, let's unpack this. You know, as you and I talked about there. Let's look at it in three ways. Let's talk about some of the problems. Let's talk about why they're happening. And then most importantly, maybe what we can do about it. So you want to start with what are some of the fundamental problems nonprofit leaders are facing with their boards?
You know, one of the things is, and I'm not coming from a place of judgment. And the book itself and what I share in the messages are, look, here's a problem, and everything that's been tried before doesn't seem to work. Now, I will say, I'll answer the question with a big positive yes, because probably there's some people in your audience that are saying, hey, we have a great board. Absolutely. Are there great boards out there? Absolutely. Are there organizations that have 100% positive relationship between staff and board members? Absolutely. But the problem that we're addressing on the podcast today is significant enough. It's affecting the good work of far too many organizations. So that's what I'm trying to help provide a fix. And so it is, so a little bit of a spoiler alert. It's not one-sided. That's why there are two fingers pointing each other on the cover of the book, The Blame Game. So it's advice for staff. It is also advice for board members, on especially board leaders, on how they can be more effective and create a better experience for their board members. So some of the things that can, you know, as we kind of jump a little bit deeper into this, I think one of the first things that nonprofit leaders, from a staff standpoint, just recognize it might be possible that they're contributing to the problem that they have.
Right. Right.
So they need to ask themselves, is it possible that I'm part of the problem and not the solution? And so when you kind of look into the mirror and take a look at some of these questions and issues we'll be talking about, that you need to answer that question for yourself.
Great point.
Right. And I think another thing that's so important for the sector, and it's not about just board members and board relationships. It really affects everything with nonprofits. But I was visiting with a local AFP chapter, Association of Fundraising Professionals, and we were talking about donor relations. Well, in the world of nonprofits, the money is so important, right? But the nonprofit sector is horrible at donor relations, and there's so much data that proves that, right? So
Yeah.
we
retention,
lose more donors than we bring in every year. So that's a whole nother topic. But so as far as board relationships go, and this is so critical. The sector continues to make the same mistakes, follow the same practices regarding board members that don't work. So why is that?
What's an example? Or Hardy, what do you mean? What is I'm sure you're getting there. What is an example of those mistakes we're making?
Well, it's in recruiting board members.
Yeah.
It's how we go about it. And so, we've all heard doing the same thing and expecting a different result, but we just keep going through the process of rinse and repeat with the same mistake. So from recruiting board members, it's kind of like, well, when terms are up, when you're going to have a vacancy, it's on a calendar already. But maybe you start thinking about board recruitment long about the last meeting before the annual meeting, and it's, hey, does anybody know anybody? And you wind up, by not being intentional, you wind up with what good people, sure, good people, nice people, but you wind up with what I call slot fillers. And slot fillers, in Hardy terminology, are those people that you have on your board because you couldn't get anybody else.
Yep. Not ideal.
And so when you do not have an intentional board recruiting process, I call that recruit board members with purpose and process, and we'll share a little bit about that. But that just sets yourself up for failure, and that you are doomed from the very beginning.
Such a good point, Hardy. And I'm guessing, again, like your book cover, where that problem exists, both sides are maybe pointing the finger at the other, right? Board members are saying, well, how come the staff hasn't prompted a process to help us more in advance? And I guess staff might be thinking the same thing. Well, how come board members aren't helping recruit? Is that fair that both sides are kind of looking at the other for the answer?
It's very fair, and I'm giving you a virtual high five here for that great question. And settle on who's responsible for the recruiting. And it's not a right or wrong answer. It's just, what's your answer? So some organizations, staff, CEO is in charge of board recruiting. In some organizations, the board participates in that. So, whatever works, for you, that's the main thing.
Couldn't agree more. Well, Hardy, what else are there? That's one, I guess. Any other headline kind of problems? I love that you're raising the recruitment. I've used the same concept that the best nonprofit organizations, boards in particular, think about nominating as a year-round process, right? Not as you suggest that many do, which is they wait till the last minute, right?
Right. Well, I like sport. I'm a sports guy. I like sports. And one of the, you have the season, and you're keeping score on the schedule and all that. And then there's another season. It's recruitment season. And that's, to me, that's almost as much fun to watch as it is the actual games themselves.
Right.
So
right.
I know from coaching youth basketball of middle school boys, and traveling around on occasion, doing some travel ball, and just with good kids in the community, trying to create a positive experience. Not, maybe some basketball was thrown in there somewhere, but we would wind up in some tournaments, big time tournaments, playing against big time teams, future NBA players as far as basketball goes. And I mean, there's scouts that are there watching 6th, 7th, and 8th grade year olds,
Wow.
and trying to project them not only for future college talent, but future professional level talent. So again, middle school. But that's how far out top programs are looking at athletes, and they do it in all sports: football, baseball, soccer, everything, boys and girls. It's just amazing at that talent. And so how does that relate to boards? Well, what they're doing is they're identifying players to track, and they're watching their progress all the way through middle school, all the way through high school, until they get to the official recruiting window. And now when you're looking at it, if you're following recruiting in sports, you're college recruiting, you're seeing, well, okay, this is a prospect for the class of 23, the class of 24, the class of 25. Well, this is 2022. So if you're talking about the class of 24 and the class of 25, what are they, sophomores and freshmen in high school or something like that? It's unbelievable. So they're already projecting their talent, skills, their IQ for the sport that they're in, and their projected physical abilities that they're, when they mature, they're kind of on a track to be physically have those attributes that are being looked for. So why not do that for nonprofit boards? Who are the potential board members? So the first thing is to develop the what. What are you wanting your board members to do? What is the outcome? What performance outcome are you looking for? What's the skill set that you need on your particular board? And I'm going to suggest, best practices from a sector standpoint may or may not be the best practices for you as far as who you have on your board. It's just like every sports team, who they get has to fit into their system, right? It's a system for one team is not necessarily going to apply for another team. Same thing with nonprofit boards. So if you identify the what, then start identifying the who. And so, okay, what vacancies do you have coming up this year? What vacancies are coming up the year after that, and the year after that, and the year after that? And oh, by the way, what about those vacancies you didn't count on? Because life happens and somebody gets a transfer, they need to drop off, whatever the reason is, there's a vacancy. So would it make sense to start developing a pool of prospects to serve on your board? And they might not even be involved in your organization, but you're looking out into the community that you're in, especially true on a local basis, but it applies nationwide as well. But look out there in the marketplace, if you will, and who would be a good board member. And then maybe start thinking about that farm system that every organization has. And what's the farm system everybody has? Your committee structure, right? So start getting folks into your farm system, start developing them as committee members, start getting them involved in projects as volunteers, your volunteer network, and then you're able to evaluate with a future board member mindset, hey, this could be talent we need to be thinking about in advance. And that way you reduce the odds of slot fillers. Now, one other final thing, in sports, teams that want to win championships, how many Division I football teams are there in college? How many Division I basketball teams are there? Not every one of those programs is going to be thinking about an NCAA national championship run. That's not, they're there to offer sports as a supplement to the student experience on their particular college campus. And if that's the case, that's great, because they know what they're doing and they recruit players accordingly. Well, if you're wanting to win national championships, you've got to have national championship players. And I'm going to submit to you, if you want a winning, successful nonprofit organization, successful board, you've got to recruit successful championship board members.
Hardy, I love it. And I love the fact that the analogy to, I guess, longer term recruiting is certainly appropriate, because as you said earlier, many of our nonprofit friends unfortunately default to it's the month before our new season starts. We're trying to recruit with 1 month to go. And it occurs to me, Hardy, the talented board candidates in our communities likely are very busy, likely are serving on another board, and may well be willing to help you, but they're not going to be available in 1 month. But that's, I guess, what you're saying, Hardy. You put them on the target list, the recruiting list, so that they might join you for the class of 23, 24, or maybe even 25. Is that fair?
Absolutely. And I'm laughing because you bring up another one of my I guess maybe a Hardy soapbox issue. And I'll try not to get too far off track here, but you know, that saying that we all have, we've all heard it, we all say it, and we all probably do it. You know, if you want something done, who do you get?
Yeah.
You go out and get a busy person, right?
Exactly.
Well, I'm going to say not so fast, my friends, from one of those fun sports folks I enjoy watching on Saturday morning football programs, but so not so fast, my friends. Think about this. Don't you want your board members to make you their number one community involvement, volunteer involvement priority? Right?
Great
Don't
point.
you want to be number one?
Yep.
So if you're limiting your focus on, well, here's Hardy, he's on 5 other boards right now, so he must be pretty good. Well, think about the reality of this. How many board meetings can Hardy get to in a month? How many of Hardy's friends and business customers and clients can Hardy hit up for donations and contributions to every single cause he's involved with? How long are those calls going to be received? And how many checks are Hardy's friends and network willing to write just because he's on another board? I'm going to suggest to you, there's not an endless well to go tap there.
Great
so
point.
if you can think about, and let me just challenge, let me just call it out right now. I think you go for those because maybe you need to be working a little bit harder, a little bit smarter, and be a little bit more creative. And by thinking further in advance with more intentional, recruit board members with purpose and process, you can identify board members who have all the attributes you're looking for, including the ability to give and help you get those needed funds. You can find people that other folks haven't grabbed yet, and you will be their number one priority. Would that make sense?
Point well made. And you're right. I think the easy way out, as you suggest, is you go for the high-profile community leader who, in fact, is already overburdened with commitments. And so in that case, Hardy, as you're saying, even if they say yes, maybe you're still getting a slot filler, right, who is substandard to what would be an ideal candidate for your board, who really is committed to you. And so it reinforces your point that you got to have a good recruitment system and not just default to the easy, well, this is a popular local corporate leader, so if we could just get him or her, all our problems will be solved. And you're saying, no, that's the easy way out, isn't it?
Absolutely. And think about this. I mean, I've got a few notes about fundraising, and we'll get to that in just a little bit. But think about this. What's the number one purpose of a nonprofit board? What's the number one purpose? And that's to serve your organization with good governance.
Yes. Right.
Well, good governance requires attendance at those board meetings. It requires reading the minutes. It requires understanding the financial statements. It requires a whole heck of a lot. Now, if you go out and you get one of these folks that are so involved, they're on multiple boards, again, are they going to be good governance board members for you? And you just have to answer that question yourself. Yeah. I'm not trying to be too critical, just poke you just a little bit, just to challenge your thinking.
That's a great point. Again, and it reinforces, though, the depth of your process, Hardy, right? Which is, in most cases, I think it's lacking, because we're going for the easy way out, or we're trying just to fill slots, and thus we're missing out on, maybe, if we had been more thoughtful, some talented board members who could, in fact, really make a difference. And of course, you alluded to another issue that I'm sure is on your list, right, Hardy, which is fundraising. So the staff members saying, "Hey, I thought my board members understood, but they're supposed to help me raise a lot of money." But where do you see that issue occurring, and what can we do about it?
Well, now let me share with this. Share with the listeners today on your path to nonprofit leadership. There are, of course, a number of different activities related to fundraising that a board member can participate in. I know that. When I talk about what I'm getting ready to share with you in your audience is related to direct ask and direct giving. Okay, so that's the context of where I'm coming from. It is so important in the recruitment process from the very get-go to get clarity on expectations. So first of all, the organization has to have clarity on expectations. And so when you're in your strategic planning conversations, in your developing expectations for board members, that's one of those critical things you've got to have understanding for and acceptance for. So let me just elaborate. You know, we quite often in the recruitment process, we've got a list of expectations that we want to communicate. Well, let me back up. We should be communicating with our board candidate,
right.
And it could very much involve fundraising, direct solicitations, or direct giving in a substantial amount. But quite often, that conversation doesn't come up. Expectations don't come up.
Agreed.
And why would that be? Because you're afraid. You've waited until the last minute. You've got to fill a board seat, and quite often the hard conversation, the reality conversation, doesn't happen because you're afraid your prospect will say no, and now you're stuck with a vacancy and you don't know what to do.
You don't want to scare them off, right, Hardy?
You don't want to scare them off.
Right.
So, you know, in a relationship, I mean, would it, because this is a relationship, so would it make sense? You know, you see someone, you kind of, okay, you're thinking, well, maybe I could be in a personal relationship with this person. And I've got a whole lot of things I would like to get done in life with a prospective partner. But you know what? I better go ahead and grab them while I can. And they may even have some flaws, but we can talk about my expectations. Let me just get them to the altar and the I do, and we'll deal with all this other stuff later.
Uh-huh.
So where are you? You know what they call that in marketing and advertising?
What's that?
Bait and switch.
Indeed.
And it's not legal. So all of a sudden, when whoever is recruiting your board members are downplaying whatever time commitment it is, the money, you haven't had the money talk, all of that, you're downplaying it, and then boom, first meeting, whoom, here's a big list of what we're expecting you to do for us, bait and switch. not legal in most states if you're selling cars or appliances or anything else. So when you're talking about fundraising, get clarity on the expectations. So if you're thinking about you want your board members, to be involved in direct giving, direct asking, just have the conversation up front. And if they're not willing to do it, then okay, then you've had the conversation. They're not going to fit within the parameters of what you're looking for. And oh, wait, by the way, do you think maybe in a conversation when you're talking to a board candidate, would it be important to just stop talking long enough and listen? And what would you be listening for? You might want to listen to their expectations for board service. And if you could visually in our conversation today do a Venn diagram, and you've got the two circles, the organization's expectations for board members, and then the other circle is the board members' expectations for what they'd like to do. And wherever those circles meet, that's the sweet spot, right? As a visual PowerPoint slide here for a Venn conversation, right? So, sometimes when you're working on board recruitment, sometimes a no is the best answer. It's the best answer for them, and it's the best answer for you. So if it's just not going to work out, then you both kind of move on. They're going to be impressed with the organization because you thought enough about asking them, and consider, and you might be able to come back, at a future date. But fundraising is a major, major issue. And I find quite often that there's an assumption that someone is on a nonprofit board, so therefore they should be expected to give personally, and they should be expecting to ask other people to give. However, the conversation doesn't happen on the front end, and that's the big mistake.
Such a good illustration, Hardy, once again. And as you alluded to earlier, if we jump to the end of that story, it's easy to see the staff perspective. Hey, this board member's not doing what we wanted. But as you're correctly pointing out, if we went to the origin of that story, the beginning, we'd see where the problem started, right? Staff member never told the board member clearly about these expectations. And so kind of unfair for the staff to now complain about a underperforming board member. But Hardy, let's move to another question, because again, what is great about your book is you have brought both sides of this story, both perspectives. What did you learn from board members? How can they be more effective? And, we may well have board members listening to this conversation. So what advice might you offer to the board member listening about how he or she might be more effective in this role?
I think that's another great question. And of course, not only in the book do I outline, no one needs to be told that there's a problem. I mean, there is a problem and everyone knows it. What I do is, in sharing the board member perspective, I also develop the solutions to solve the challenges that the board members bring up. So it's not just telling you got a problem. We're going to help you fix it too. So here's what board members say from the board member perspective that will help them as volunteers stay engaged, and also as board leaders consider this and working with your other board members. There is some fascinating research that's been done by Board Source and others about their two significant gaps. The first gap is in the knowledge of roles and responsibilities. Board Source, year in and year out, and they're every other year, I should say, surveys that measure board performance. And this is based on leadership input, both as board members and leadership from staff. Huge gap in knowledge. And so I kind of wonder, well, if there's criticism for board members not fully understanding what their roles and responsibilities are, Well, whose fault is that? Who's supposed to fix it? The board member probably did not come in with a full understanding unless you had a really awesome recruitment process and really awesome orientation for new board members. Probably don't have a clue. So don't you think organizations and board leadership, who would be the veterans of this deal, need to ensure that new board members coming on are properly onboarded and properly trained and educated on what their roles and responsibilities are? Now, that's my challenge to the sector. The second one is, and this I find quite fascinating, is the significant gap in board leadership experience and skills for first-time board leaders, board chairs especially.
Okay.
So an individual, to explain, individuals may have been on a board previously with other organizations. That may be why you recruited them. They may have been chairs of various nonprofit boards. But it's just like my coaches used to ask me, well, Hardy, are you practicing to get better, or are you just practicing and reinforcing bad habits?
Right.
So probably we tend to assume that someone knows what to do about, especially at a local nonprofit board. We kind of assume, well, they're a top corporate executive in the community. They probably understand. Well, hello, ding dong. There is a difference between running a corporate board meeting and a board meeting of volunteers who are your peers, and you go to church with them. They coach your kids. You are their kid's Sunday school teacher. I mean, on and on and on and on and on. So there's a whole lot here. There's a different dynamic. And so as far as facilitation skills, and involving skills and running meetings, all of those things need to be taken into account. So be intentional. The advice here is be intentional about board leadership development. Don't assume they have the skills and experience that are needed. Make sure they do get what's needed so they are prepared for success. Does that make sense?
It totally does. And I'm delighted you bring it up, because I think you're right. There are two levels here. One, many organizations, I think, do a poor job of the onboarding in general. You know, I may hand you a 3-ring binder of every piece of information at my nonprofit, expect you to digest it, and then, you know, come to work ready to go. But I like the fact, Hardy, you're suggesting it's more than just an orientation to the organization, but not assuming that I am ready to lead a committee or be an officer on the board, despite whatever other experiences I may have. So I guess, Hardy, what we need to do is maybe illustrate what is best practice around meeting management, how our meetings are run, or what have you seen when that's done well to help a new board leader succeed?
Well, let me jump off the big diving board here, because the main focus is, the challenge is engagement, around engagement. So let me answer that question with this very strong statement, and then I'll explain why. Make board members matter. Board members are volunteers. We know that. Volunteers today, board members, want to have impact. They want to know that their volunteer service to your board is going to make a difference. Here's something else. They do not want their time wasted. Okay? So think about your board meeting. Is it a start at a time certain and end at a time certain? Come hell or high water, it does not matter. There's no time really in the board agenda. It's all about reports. Boom, 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 boom.
Right.
There's no time for challenge. There's no time for debate. There's no time for discussion. There's really no facilitation to make sure everyone has a contributing voice to participate in the conversation. So here's a tell. Here's a tell if your board members are not placing your organization as a number one priority in their thinking. What's board attendance look like? And are they coming to the meeting, sliding into their seat just in time for the gavel to come down and call the meeting to order? They're not getting there in advance for maybe that morning cup of coffee, a sweet roll and some juice, some conversation with their other board members that they're glad to see because they haven't seen them in a while. Or at the very end, as soon as the chair says the meeting is adjourned, they're running as fast as they can to get out of the room. They're not wanting to stick around. It's not a fun experience. So consider ways to make meetings matter. As far as having an impact, consider this. And it may mean adding a little bit of length to your board meeting structure.
Right.
But in your strategic plan, I'm going to make up a number because it'll help my math in the conversation. Say you have 4 main strategic priorities that are the most important for your organization. Consider maybe once a quarter, 1 per quarter. That's all, it covers all 4. Once a quarter, you have time on your agenda to get into one of the 4 strategic priorities. A full-on discussion, extra reports from staff, a chance to evaluate, is the strategic plan on this particular priority, are we making progress? Do we need to adjust? Do we need to do something differently? And what that does, that starts utilizing your board members as what I call high-value assets. They're involved in strategic conversation and shaping the strategic direction of the board and the organization they serve. They're not just coming in there to listen to a bunch of reports and they don't have any chance for input. So why are they even there?
Yep.
So those are a couple of tips. Another thing is for board members who are coming prepared, they've obviously read the minutes, they've got good questions, they're engaged. Recognize that. Model the behavior that you want. Just, so don't criticize someone for not showing up, not reading the minutes, not being prepared, but be positive and thank those who are performing in the way that would be the model, show them as the model board member. Would that make sense?
Yeah, that's a great idea. And you're right. We tend to dwell on some of the negative behaviors, but I think a good nonprofit leader could in fact lift up, and that sends a message to everybody else, right? When you're thanking the board member who has in fact done their homework, arrived prepared, arrived early, stayed late, asked good questions and things like that. And so you're right. That is indeed practical advice a leader can use to model the kind of behavior we want from our board members. And I think the good board members, of course, are going to follow that lead. They're smart.
Absolutely.
They're there. And so, Hardy, this is fantastic. We're, I know, just scratching the surface of many of the issues you talk about in your writing, and in particularly your fantastic book. Any final advice? Maybe is there one other item or that you would add? I know we're not going to get all of the good advice you can offer, but anything else you would say to a nonprofit leader listening that wants to improve the relationship with their board?
I would say the number one issue to recognize, understand, be aware of, and challenge yourself to ask, how can you improve, is all around communication. And this is the top issue that my board research revealed.
Yep.
That poor communications is a major, if not the major influencer on board members becoming disengaged. Let me explain. It's not about more. It's not about more emails, more reports. It's not about that. It's about being effective. So, and why is this so important? Whenever I ask an audience, what's the most important thing in a long-term, successful personal relationship? 100% of the time, the answer comes back communication.
Yep.
Right? Communication. So it's understanding that every single one of your board members, just kind of visualize right now, visualize you're in a board meeting, think about the different faces that are looking back at you in this visual exercise. Every single one of those board members has a unique preference to how they prefer to be communicated with. Okay, so it could be a report, it could be visuals, it could be more data, it could be more research, it could be a simple text message, or it could be they want a personal phone call or a personal visit. So does this mean extra work for the nonprofit executive? Yes, it does. But just like in a personal relationship outside the workplace, how bad do you want to make it work? And how would you know what the personal communication preference is?
Got to ask them.
You got to ask them. And when would be a real good time to start that? In the recruitment process.
Right at the beginning.
Just ask them.
Yep.
Now, what's the most important part of good communication? It's listening. Board members want to know, like any volunteer, like any of us in a personal relationship, we want to feel valued. We want to feel like we're being understood, that our opinions matter. So take time to listen to what your board members are saying. That may be inside a board meeting or outside a board meeting in personal one-on-one conversations that you're having. So look in the mirror. Think about your communication styles. And you know something, this I almost forgot. This is the secret sauce. So understanding your board members' preferences and communication styles, but what about your own? What kind of a communicator are you? Is it your natural tendency to just provide as few details as possible? You're a very succinct communicator, day, night, black, white, yes, no, and that's it. Well, the person that you're communicating with may prefer you communicate in a different way. Are you that person that's just going to give more and more and more details? You're going to keep talking and talking and talking, and you're going to stay up all night before the board meeting, cranking out these big reports that no one's going to read because they get them at the last minute. Well, rethink your communication styles. That would be the number one advice.
It's great advice, Hardy, as has everything else you've shared. And again, I hope, as you said at the beginning, you said at the end in a wonderful closing, that maybe this whole exercise starts with some reflection as a nonprofit leader. Where do I fit into this kind of question, particularly as it relates to my relationship with my board? And I hope that, number one, our listeners are going to get a copy of Stop the Nonprofit Board Blame Game, because that's going to get them into all of the things running through your head, Hardy, right? Day and night, I bet. But maybe one other parting gift. What's another book that's been meaningful to you that you'd recommend to our listeners?
Okay, could I expand on that and offer more than one? If
I think I could give you a bonus one, but yeah, go ahead and give it to me.
Great book, Creativity Inc. by Ed Catmull. Now, Ed Catmull is the head dude at Pixar. And I thought when I got the book, it was all about how they made Toy Story and those other great movies.
Yeah.
And yes, it is. But there's a message behind the movie screen on why Pixar has been so successful. And I will share with you, it's the system of collaboration that Pixar has developed. And then he explains the how-to. So very, very good for working with nonprofits and nonprofit boards.
Excellent.
Another book I just finished reading, Adam Grant's new book, Think Again. And I think that certainly applies to the conversation that we've been having today. Think again.
Love it, Hardy. It's great. I've read the first one and I've heard great things about the second one, and delighted to add it to our collective wish list for good reading as nonprofit leaders. Thank you again for all of these ideas, suggestions, recommendations. And final question, of course, where can people find out more about you and the great work you're doing, Hardy?
Well, thank you very much. On Amazon, the Stop the Nonprofit Board Blame Game page on Amazon has information all about Hardy, and also my website, hardysmith.com. Would welcome
Fantastic.
all of your listeners from your path to nonprofit leadership to stop by and visit.
Hardy, really appreciate it. Thanks again for joining me on the path.
Thank you.